Michael joins us from California. Welcome, Michael Shellenberger. How are you, mate?
Good. Thanks for having me, Ron.
Great to see you again. So the book's coming out and it's going great guns. So as I said, we urge people to buy that. Now tell us first of all about your apology, and then we want to hear about your quibbles with the Australian media, among others. But first tell us about the apology and what happened.
Well, I felt an obligation to apologize on behalf of environmentalists for having basically terrified, not just the public, but also adolescents, leading them to believe that the world is on the brink of apocalypse. My daughter's 14. She's fine because I explained the science to her, but many of her friends really don't know if they're going to live long enough to have children. So I just announced, it took a long way to get here, but I felt like I just needed to not just tell the truth about climate change, but tell the full truth, which is that climate change is real, but it's not the end of the world. It's not even our most serious environmental problem. It's become a distraction from other more important environmental problems, and it's causing significant anxiety and depression among adolescents and others in the culture.
So, Michael, you put this apology up there, and then it was pulled. You were cancelled, or they tried to cancel you, but you fought back.
Yeah, I disagreed with Forbes's decision to censor the piece. I think it is well within Forbes's writing guidelines. Nonetheless, I'm happy to announce I will continue to write for Forbes and did publish a piece the next day to make sure that the relationship was in the right place.
Excellent.
Now, the Australian Guardian recently attacked me. I was not going to sit by while they did it. They sent me a set of libelous questions that even just negating them, just rejecting them as completely false, which is what they were, would actually in some way incriminate me, and I wasn't going to play that game. So I just published an open letter to the Guardian pointing out that the Guardian, and I interviewed their advertising executive before I wrote my letter, I discovered that the Guardian is actively seeking renewable energy advertising. They've accepted renewable energy advertising in the past. I'm one of the biggest critics of renewable energy in the world. And so you have a situation where this so-called newspaper, The Guardian, which is basically a renewable energy organization, is attacking one of the greatest critics of this technology, and in a way that's devastating to the technology, because I point out all the ways in which renewables are much worse for the environment than fossil fuels.
James.
I'm wondering, you talk in your apology piece about this phenomenon of unsavory motivations that some people have behind pushing this global warming scare, and I want to dive a little bit deeper into that. Can you speak to how much of this is about just sort of the anomie of modern life and people feeling bad about having so much stuff, and so, as always, they have this kind of thing where they want to go kind of neo-primitive? How much of it has to do with the money that's being pushed through the system by people who are getting renewable energy money, and how much of the environmentalists who are really pushing this could be called, in Lenin's poignant phrase, useful idiots for people with other agendas?
Well, there's three parts to Apocalypse Never. The first part is just a straight-up debunking of common myths about climate change, deforestation, plastic waste, species extinction. The second third of the book is about how humans actually save nature in the real world. We save the whales by substituting petroleum first and then palm oil for whale oil. And then the third part of the book looks at why, if environmental problems are obviously manageable and not the end of the world, did we come to see them as apocalyptic? And I look at three of the key drivers, what I see as the key drivers: money, power, and religion. And they're each important factors. There's huge amounts of renewable energy money that's been used to promote the climate scare. It's been used to terrorize and terrify children. But there's also a kind of status need that people are expressing. Oh, look at me, I own a Toyota Prius or a Tesla. There's that part of it, which also is the same part that I think is denying poor countries the cheap energy they need. The World Bank used to fund cheap energy, hydroelectric dams, which is the engine of economic growth. They don't do that anymore because of the radical environmental lobby. But the third chapter, the final chapter of the book, explores the ways in which environmentalism has become the new secular religion of the global elite. And it's no exaggeration. This is not, everything I wrote is all backed up by the best available science. There's a wide scholarly literature that describes how apocalyptic environmentalists are in the grip of a new religion, but they don't know it. So whereas others would be like, identify as a Jew or as a Christian or as a Muslim, apocalyptic environmentalists think that they are atheists or secular and just repeating the science. And that's part of what makes it so dangerous.
Rita.
I want to go back to this activism masquerading as journalism and your experience with it in the past week, in particular with the Australian media. You've been called one of the heroes of the environment by Times Magazine. You've got a long history of environmental activism and works, and yet because you've come clean about some of the hyperbole involved in that world, you are now personally under attack with these hit pieces. How can you counter that? Have you considered defamation action, or how can you make sure your name isn't blackened and your reputation damaged by these hit pieces?
Well, this is, thank you for the question. You're asking exactly the right question. I didn't write this book and just think, oh, I'll just publish it and nothing will happen. I knew exactly what they would do. They would seek character assassination, libelous, all sorts of attacks on my character, because they can't attack the evidence in the book. This book is dangerous to apocalyptic environmentalism. When the facts and the data of this book are widely understood, apocalyptic environmentalism cannot last. It will not survive. It's not going to have any more legitimacy. So all I'll say is that we are taking all appropriate measures, legal and otherwise, to make sure that they don't succeed in their character assassination. I will say that social media is disruptive. It's not very clear what The Guardian offers to its readers more than just some random blogger or some person on Twitter. They don't really, it's a difficult industry they're in, which is why they have to solicit so much money from the renewable energy industry in order to survive. But I will say that, by being aggressive out there, by exposing their libelous emails and accusations, I found that there's actually a huge amount of support. People don't like cancel culture. Most people don't like this censorious attitude. Most people would like to decide for themselves what they think of a book without having a big media company decide whether they can read it. So I will say, I think there is still I've discovered a very strong commitment to freedom of speech. And the vast majority of people are not part of this radical left, apocalyptic environmentalist agenda. People care very much about the environment. Everybody cares about the environment. Everybody wants to save endangered species. But they don't want this push for social control that so many apocalyptic environmentalists are demanding.
Michael, it will come as no surprise to you, although it did come as a surprise to some Australians, that The Guardian was set up by our former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, himself a massive renewables advocate. Even when he was supposedly on the right side of politics, he set up that particular newspaper. But fascinated, Michael, you mentioned your daughter. We had earlier on the show Xeon Lights, and she specifically said that thanks to you and thanks to the conversations she'd had with you, she has questioned much of the Extinction Rebellion agenda, and we've had her talking earlier about renewables versus nuclear. But I'm really pleased you mentioned your daughter and how you talking to her has allowed her to kind of see things more practically. This is why your book is so fundamental. I would urge every parent and grandparent out there to buy the book and read it, the better to educate our children. I would say to you, Michael, how much success do you think you can have in actually debunking this horrendous fear campaign?
I mean, I don't want to sound overconfident, but we feel very good about it. I mean, my publisher says they've never seen a book sell like this. They've never seen a book sell like this where the author had not been on TV in the United States. Interestingly enough, I'm on Australian TV. Yes. The Australian publisher asked if they could move up the publication date because they were getting so much demands to read this book. People are hungry for the facts. I interviewed my daughter's friends, and they just said, we would like some basic information. I mean, nobody knows that the deaths from natural disasters has declined 90% over the last 100 years. It's declined 80% over the last 40 years. Carbon emissions have peaked in most rich countries, are going down in most rich countries. These are really important things people need to know. Yes, there's still reason to be concerned about climate change, but we should actually confront these problems by understanding some of the basic facts. It's remarkable to me how brainwashed one gets from reading the mainstream news media about environmental problems. Most environmentalists have no idea of the most important and basic facts about climate change, deforestation, plastic waste, species extinction. And when they learn them, I think what you'll end up with is a much more optimistic view, much more realistic view of our potential to both protect endangered species, allow for more habitat to return, and also make sure that the planet doesn't get too hot.
Absolutely. Well, Michael Shellenberger, as I said, people must read your book and carry on appearing on Australian television, particularly Outsiders. You know you've always got a home here. And thanks so much for talking to us today, and keep up the great work, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, Michael Shellenberger, so much.
Thanks for having me.